The first gunshot came just before dawn, jolting Josephine Blackett from a fitful sleep filled with the same haunting dream of her husband's death. She clutched the worn quilt to her chest, heart hammering against her ribs as she strained to listen through the thin walls of her isolated farmhouse. A year of living alone on the Nebraska plains had taught her to distinguish between sounds coyotes from wolves, thunder from gunfire. This was definitely gunfire, followed by the distant whinny of a horse in distress. Nebraska Territory, 1868. Life had carved deep lines into Josephine's face that made her appear older than her 26 years. Her once vibrant auburn hair now hung limp around hollowed cheeks, and the spark that had once danced in her green eyes had dimmed to barely an ember. The small homestead that had represented hope and a fresh start with her husband Thomas now felt like a prison of memories and backbreaking work. Slipping from beneath the covers, Josephine reached for the shotgun that never left her bedside. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet as she moved to the window, pulling back the faded curtain just enough to peer into the gray light of early morning. A lone figure slumped over a chestnut mare was making a slow, unsteady approach toward her property. Blood darkened the rider's left side, and the horse limped badly, favoring its right foreleg. "Damnation," Josephine muttered, quickly pulling on her husband's old trousers beneath her nightgown and shoving her feet into worn boots. Strangers meant trouble, but she couldn't ignore someone clearly in dire need. Thomas would have helped, and despite everything, she tried to honor his memory by holding on to whatever scraps of humanity this harsh land hadn't yet stripped away. She stepped onto the porch, shotgun trained steadily on the approaching rider. "That's far enough," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "State your business." The rider's head lifted slightly, revealing a face partially obscured by several days' worth of beard and streaked with dirt and blood. "Madam," he managed, his voice a ragged whisper. "I don't mean no harm, been shot. Horse is injured too." He attempted to straighten but winced sharply. "If you could spare some water." Before he could finish, the man slid sideways from his saddle, hitting the ground with a dull thud that sent a plume of dust into the air. The mare snorted nervously but remained standing, trembling with exhaustion. Josephine hesitated only briefly before lowering her shotgun. Keeping one eye on the unconscious stranger, she approached cautiously, nudging him with the toe of her boot. When he didn't respond, she knelt beside him, noting the steady rise and fall of his chest. The wound in his side was still seeping blood, but not at an alarming rate. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of years under the open sky. His clothes were trail-worn but of decent quality, a buckskin jacket now stained with blood, denim trousers tucked into well-made boots. A gun belt encircled his waist, the holster empty. "Well, mister," she sighed, "seems God's decided to complicate my morning." With strength born of necessity, Josephine grasped him under the arms and began the arduous task of dragging him toward the house. He was heavy, but not unmanageable for a woman who'd spent the past year doing the work of two. The mare followed unbidden, limping along behind them as if unwilling to be separated from her master. Josephine paused to catch her breath, studying the animal's injury. The horse would need tending too, but the man came first. By the time she had him situated on her kitchen table, sweat dampened Josephine's nightgown and strands of hair clung to her flushed face. She worked methodically, cutting away his blood-soaked shirt to reveal a bullet wound that, while ugly, appeared to have passed clean through the fleshy part of his side. "Lucky man," she murmured, cleansing the wound with whiskey that made him groan even in unconsciousness. "Or maybe not, depending on who's after you." As she worked, binding his torso with strips of clean linen, Josephine took note of the numerous scars that mapped his body testament to a hard life lived. His hands, now limp at his sides, were calloused but well-shaped, with long fingers that suggested he might once have been suited to finer work than whatever rough living had claimed him. After tending to the man, Josephine turned her attention to his horse, leading the exhausted animal to the small stable where her own mare and 2 milk cows were housed. The chestnut's leg required careful cleaning and a poultice of herbs, a remedy Thomas had taught her during their first year on the homestead. "Your master better be worth the trouble," she told the horse, stroking its velvety muzzle. The animal nickered softly in response, dark eyes watching Josephine with what seemed like gratitude. By mid-morning, Josephine had both man and beast settled as comfortably as circumstances allowed. The stranger now occupied her bed, his breathing steady if somewhat labored. She'd done what she could, cleaned his wound, forced some water between his parched lips and covered him with her quilt. The rest was up to him and whatever strength he possessed. Settling into the rocking chair beside the bed, shotgun across her lap, Josephine studied his face. In repose, with the dirt and blood washed away, he was handsome in a weathered way, strong jaw, straight nose, and dark lashes that cast shadows on his cheeks. A scar bisected his right eyebrow, giving him a perpetually questioning expression. "Who are you?" she wondered aloud. "And what manner of trouble follows at your heels?" As if in response to her question, his eyes fluttered open, startling blue against his tanned skin. For a moment, confusion clouded his gaze, then alarm as he realized he was in an unfamiliar place. He attempted to sit up, grimacing as pain lanced through his side. "I wouldn't move too quick if I were you," Josephine advised, tightening her grip on the shotgun. "That bullet didn't hit anything vital, but you've lost plenty of blood." The man's eyes fixed on her, then darted to the weapon in her lap before returning to her face. "I'm obliged for your help, madam," he said, his voice low and rough with thirst. "Name's Xavier Colt." "Josephine Blackett," she responded stiffly. "You're welcome to rest until you're able to move on, Mr. Colt, but I'll be needing to know what sort of trouble might come calling after you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair question." He accepted the cup of water she cautiously offered. "I was tracking a gang that's been rustling cattle north of here, managed to get too close and took a bullet for my troubles." His expression darkened. "Lost my gun when I fell from my horse the first time, been riding half-conscious since yesterday." "The Harlow gang?" Josephine asked sharply. She'd heard rumors of cattle thieves operating in the territory, led by a particularly vicious man named Silas Harlow. Xavier nodded slowly. "You know of them. They passed through these parts last spring. Took two of my neighbor's best breeding bulls and shot his son when he tried to stop them." Her jaw tightened at the memory. "The boy lived, but he'll never walk right again." Xavier's eyes narrowed. "Then you understand why they need to be stopped." "I understand that trouble follows men like you, Mr. Colt, and I've had my fill of trouble." Josephine stood abruptly. "Rest today. You can be on your way tomorrow if your fever doesn't worsen." With that, she turned and left the small bedroom, closing the door firmly behind her. Outside, she leaned against the rough wooden wall, drawing a shaky breath. There was something about Xavier Colt that unsettled her, perhaps the intensity in those blue eyes, or the quiet confidence in his voice, despite his weakened state. He was the sort of man who carried danger with him like a shadow, and Josephine had sworn after burying Thomas that she would never again allow her life to be dictated by a man's choices. The day passed with Josephine keeping herself busy with chores, feeding the livestock, tending her small vegetable garden, and mending a tear in one of her few dresses. She checked on Xavier periodically, offering water and a thin broth she'd prepared, avoiding conversation beyond what was necessary. By evening, a fever had set in, his skin hot to the touch as his body fought infection. Throughout the night, Josephine bathed his forehead with cool water, forcing willow bark tea between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow. In his delirium, he muttered names, some with affection, others with venom, and once reached for her hand with surprising strength. "Sarah," he whispered, blue eyes fever bright and unfocused. "Don't go, please don't go." "Hush now," Josephine soothed, gently extracting her hand from his grip. "It's the fever talking. Drink this." She helped him sip more of the bitter tea, watching as he drifted back into restless sleep. By dawn, the fever had broken, leaving Xavier weak but clear-eyed. Josephine found him attempting to sit up when she brought fresh bandages to change his dressing. "You're stubborn, I'll give you that," she remarked, setting down her supplies, "but you'll tear those stitches if you keep struggling." "Been called worse," he replied with a faint smile. "How long was I out?" "Just the night." She helped him ease into a sitting position, noting the wince he couldn't quite suppress. Your horse is doing better than you are. The swelling in her leg has gone down considerably. Gratitude softened his features. Thank you for tending to her. Willow's been with me through some hard times. Willow, Josephine repeated, good name for a steady companion. As she changed his bandage, working with efficient movements, Xavier studied her face. You've done this before, patching up wounds. It wasn't a question, but Josephine answered anyway. My husband was thrown from a horse 2 years ago, broke 3 ribs and gashed his head something terrible. I learned quick. Your husband, Xavier said carefully. He's not here now. Josephine's hands stilled momentarily. Pneumonia took him last winter. This land gives with one hand and takes with the other. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Blackett. It's just Josephine now, she replied, securing the fresh bandage. Mrs. Blackett died with Thomas. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the soft whisper of prairie grass against the cabin walls. Josephine felt Xavier's eyes on her, seeing more than she was comfortable revealing. You should eat something, she said finally. I've got cornbread and some salt pork left from yesterday. Xavier caught her wrist as she turned to go, his touch gentle but insistent. I don't take kindly to being indebted, Josephine. When I'm healed, I'll make this right. She pulled her arm free, uncomfortable with the warmth of his skin against hers and the earnestness in his gaze. There's no debt between us, Mr. Colt, just the obligation one human being has to another. Xavier, he corrected, if I'm to call you Josephine. She gave a curt nod before retreating to the kitchen, unsettled by the exchange. There was something disarming about the man, a quiet intensity that made her walls feel suddenly less sturdy than she'd believed. Over the next 3 days, Xavier regained his strength with surprising speed. By the second day, he was able to make it to the table for meals, engaging Josephine in conversation that, despite her initial resistance, she found herself enjoying. He spoke of places she'd only read about: San Francisco with its bustling harbors, the towering red rocks of the Arizona Territory, the dense forests of Oregon. You've traveled far for a man so young, she remarked on the evening of the 3rd day as they sat on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon in a blaze of orange and crimson. Xavier smiled, the expression transforming his face from merely handsome to something that made Josephine's breath catch unexpectedly. 32 isn't so young, and restlessness has been my companion since boyhood. Never could stay in one place too long. What drives a man to wander so? Josephine asked, genuine curiosity overcoming her usual reserve. Xavier was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the darkening sky. After the war, home didn't feel like home anymore. Too many ghosts, too many memories. His fingers absently traced the scar above his eyebrow. Easier to keep moving than to sit still with all that follows behind. The war changed many things, Josephine agreed softly, remembering how Thomas had returned from fighting, quieter and prone to staring into the distance at things only he could see. It did, Xavier confirmed. Left some scars that don't show on the skin. He turned to look at her directly. What about you, Josephine? What brought you to this solitary stretch of prairie? She considered deflecting the question, but found herself answering truthfully. Thomas had dreams big enough for both of us. Land of our own, children playing in fields we'd planted with our own hands. Her voice grew distant. When the fever took our baby girl, he thought a fresh start might heal what medicine couldn't, so we came west. I'm sorry, Xavier said simply, and Josephine knew he understood the weight of loss in a way few others could. Life continues, she replied with the pragmatism that had become her armor, until it doesn't. As darkness settled around them, Josephine became acutely aware of Xavier's presence beside her, the clean scent of the soap she'd given him, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling night air. It had been so long since she'd sat in comfortable silence with another person. I should check on the animals before turning in, she said abruptly, rising from her chair. Xavier stood as well, moving with only a slight stiffness that betrayed his healing wound. I'll come with you. About time I started earning my keep. There's no need, please, he interrupted gently. Let me help. Something in his tone made refusal impossible, so Josephine merely nodded and led the way to the small stable. Together they worked in the lantern light, feeding the horses and cows, refreshing water troughs, and spreading fresh straw. Xavier moved with the easy competence of someone familiar with farm work, asking few questions and anticipating needs before they were spoken. "You've done this before," Josephine observed, echoing his earlier words to her. "Grew up on a farm in Kentucky," he explained, running a brush along Willow's flank with long, smooth strokes. "5 brothers, 2 sisters, and more chores than hours in the day." A smile touched his lips. "Ma used to say idle hands were the devil's playthings, and she wasn't about to raise children with the devil's fingerprints on them." The image made Josephine laugh, a sound so foreign to her own ears that it startled her into silence. Xavier looked up, his expression softening. "You should laugh more often, Josephine. It suits you." Heat rose to her cheeks, and she busied herself with checking the latch on the cow's stall. Laughter's been in short supply these past years. "All the more reason to welcome it when it comes calling," Xavier replied, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to wrap around her like a blanket. Later, as they walked back to the cabin under a canopy of stars, Josephine found herself wondering what it might be like if Xavier Colt stayed not just for a few days of healing, but longer. The thought was dangerous, a weakness she couldn't afford, and she pushed it firmly away. Men like Xavier didn't put down roots. They were like tumbleweeds, rolling wherever the wind took them. The following morning, Josephine woke to the smell of coffee brewing, a luxury she rationed carefully, and the sound of movement in her kitchen. For a disorienting moment, she thought Thomas had returned, that the past year had been nothing but a terrible dream. Then reality reasserted itself, and she remembered her unexpected guest. Dressing quickly in a faded blue calico dress, she plaited her hair into a simple braid and steeled herself for whatever the day might bring. Xavier had been healing well, which meant he would soon be strong enough to leave. The thought brought a confusing mixture of relief and something that felt uncomfortably like disappointment. She found Xavier at her stove, turning salt pork in a cast iron skillet with the expertise of someone used to fending for himself. He'd found a clean shirt among his saddlebags, and though it hung loosely on his frame, he looked more himself than he had since arriving. "Good morning," he greeted her with an easy smile. "Hope you don't mind me making free with your provisions. Thought I'd repay some of your hospitality with breakfast." "You didn't need to do that," Josephine replied, though the gesture touched her more than she cared to admit. It had been so long since anyone had done something simply to please her. "Wanted to," Xavier said, sliding the pork onto 2 plates alongside slices of cornbread. "Coffee's hot if you want to pour." They ate in companionable silence, the morning sun streaming through the window casting golden light across the worn wooden table. Josephine found herself studying Xavier when he wasn't looking the way his hands cradled the coffee cup. The slight furrow that appeared between his brows when he was thinking, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled. "I was thinking," Xavier said finally, setting down his empty cup, "that I should ride into town today if you can point me in the right direction. Need to send a telegram to the marshal in North Platte, let him know what happened with the Harlow gang." Josephine nodded, ignoring the sinking feeling in her stomach. Preston's Crossing is about 10 miles southwest. Small place, but they've got a telegraph office and a decent general store. "Would you mind if I borrowed your wagon? Willow should rest that leg a bit longer." "Of course," Josephine agreed. "I need supplies anyway, we can go together." Xavier's eyebrows rose slightly. "You sure don't want to impose further?" "It's no imposition," she said briskly, rising to clear the plates. "I've been putting off the trip and my flour's running low." The truth, which she was reluctant to admit even to herself, was that she wasn't ready to see the last of Xavier Colt just yet. A trip to town would extend their time together, even if only for a few more hours. They set out mid-morning, the old wagon creaking beneath them as Josephine's dappled mare, Penny, pulled them steadily across the rolling prairie. The day was fine, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers and sun-warmed grass. Beside her on the seat, Xavier sat with easy grace, occasionally pointing out a hawk circling overhead or a jackrabbit darting through the tall grass. "Beautiful country," he remarked as they crested a rise that offered a sweeping view of the plains stretching toward distant hills. "I can see why you stayed, even after Thomas died," Josephine finished when he hesitated. "Nowhere else to go, truth be told, and the land is mine now, paid for in sweat and heartache." Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. Roots run deep when they're watered with sacrifice. The simple truth of his words struck Josephine deeply. That was exactly what held her to this unforgiving piece of earth, not just practical considerations, but the sense that leaving would somehow dishonor all that she and Thomas had endured. Preston's Crossing appeared on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a single dusty street. It wasn't much, but to Josephine, who rarely left her homestead, it represented connection to a wider world that sometimes felt impossibly distant. As they drove down the main street, several people looked up with open curiosity. Josephine was a known figure, the widow who stubbornly maintained her homestead alone, but Xavier was a stranger, and strangers always attracted attention in small communities. They stopped first at the general store, where Josephine efficiently gathered her supplies while Xavier charmed Mrs. Preston, the proprietor's wife, with respectful questions about the town and its history. By the time they'd finished their transaction, Mrs. Preston was flushing with pleasure and insisting they stay for the town's upcoming harvest festival. "Your young man has lovely manners, Josephine," Mrs. Preston said in a stage whisper as Xavier loaded their purchases into the wagon. "Such a welcome change to see you with company." "Mr. Colt is just passing through," Josephine corrected firmly, her cheeks warming. "He was injured and needed assistance." Mrs. Preston's knowing smile only deepened Josephine's discomfort. "Of course, dear, how fortunate for him that he found his way to your door." While Xavier visited the telegraph office, Josephine waited in the wagon, aware of the speculative glances from townsfolk. She knew rumors would spread the widow Blackett bringing a handsome stranger to town, but found herself caring less than expected. Let them talk. Their gossip was a poor substitute for genuine connection in lives as isolated as theirs. Xavier returned looking troubled, his earlier good humor dimmed. "Everything all right?" Josephine asked as he climbed onto the wagon seat beside her. Marshall's response was concerning, Xavier replied once they were clear of town. "Harlow's gang hit a homestead north of here 2 days ago, killed the farmer, took everything of value. They're moving south." Josephine's hands tightened on the reins. "Toward Preston's Crossing," Xavier nodded grimly. "And the outlying farms, including yours." A cold knot of fear formed in Josephine's stomach. "What did the marshal suggest?" "He's gathering a posse, but it will take time. Meanwhile." Xavier hesitated, then continued firmly, "I think I should stay at your place a bit longer, Josephine. At least until we know Harlow's men have moved on." "I can protect myself," she said automatically, though the thought of facing Silas Harlow and his cutthroats alone sent a shiver down her spine. Xavier's expression was serious. "I don't doubt your courage, but Harlow travels with at least 6 men, all armed and without conscience. No one should face that alone." Josephine wanted to argue further, to maintain the independence she'd fought so hard to establish, but practicality won out. "All right," she conceded. "But only until the danger passes." Relief crossed Xavier's features. "Thank you, I'll sleep in the barn, won't intrude on your space." "That's not necessary," Josephine replied before she could reconsider. "The nights are getting cooler. You can take the pallet in the front room." The smile Xavier gave her made something flutter in her chest, a sensation almost forgotten. "I appreciate that, Josephine, truly." They rode in silence for a time, each lost in thought. The possibility of danger had cast a shadow over the bright autumn day, but Josephine found herself drawing strength from Xavier's solid presence beside her. Whatever came, she wouldn't face it alone, at least for now. As they approached her homestead, Josephine felt a strange sense of seeing it through new eyes. The small cabin with its weathered logs, the neat vegetable garden now yielding the last of its harvest, the crude fence enclosing the yard, it was humble, but it was hers, carved from wilderness by determination and hope. "Home, sweet home," she murmured, more to herself than to Xavier. He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. It's a good place, Josephine, solid, built to last. Something about the way he said it with genuine appreciation rather than pity warmed her from within. Thomas had good hands, she said, could build anything with just an axe and determination. And you've maintained it well, Xavier observed as they pulled up to the cabin. Not many women could have done what you've done here. Not many had the choice, Josephine replied, though his praise pleased her. It was this or starve. They unloaded the supplies together, working with the easy rhythm they'd established over the past few days. When everything was stored away, Xavier insisted on checking the property's perimeter, making note of approaches that would need watching if trouble came. The barn's too exposed, he told her when he returned, concern etching lines around his mouth. If Harlow's men come, they'll have a clear shot at anyone inside from those hills to the west. Josephine followed his gaze to the rolling rise of land that bordered her property. Thomas always meant to build a new barn closer to the house, she said softly. Just one of many plans that died with him. Xavier's hand came to rest briefly on her shoulder, a gentle weight that somehow steadied rather than burdened. We'll make do with what we have, just need to be strategic. The "we" didn't escape Josephine's notice, nor did the quiet confidence in his voice. For the first time in over a year, the weight of sole responsibility eased slightly from her shoulders, allowing her to draw a fuller breath than she'd managed in too long. That evening, as darkness settled around the cabin, they sat before the hearth with mugs of coffee laced with a splash of whiskey from Xavier's saddlebag. The warmth of the fire and the drink loosened Josephine's habitual reserve, and she found herself sharing stories of her life before the homestead, her childhood in Ohio. Her courtship with Thomas, their early dreams before grief and hardship had worn them down. He sounds like a good man, Xavier said when she fell silent, memories catching in her throat like burrs. The kind who leaves a mark on the world, even if not in the ways history remembers. He was, Josephine agreed, staring into the dancing flames, stubborn as the day is long but kind. Always kind. She looked up to find Xavier watching her, his blue eyes reflecting firelight. What about you? You've told me where you've been, but not much about who you were before all that wandering. Xavier smiled faintly, swirling the remains of his whiskey. Not much to tell. That doesn't sound like 100 other tales. Youngest son of a farmer, too restless to follow my brothers into the fields, ran off at 16 to see what lay beyond Kentucky's borders. He shrugged. Found out the world's bigger than I imagined and smaller too. And the war. Josephine asked gently, you mentioned it before. A shadow crossed his face. Fought for the Union, believed in the cause or thought I did. Reality was messier. His fingers again traced the scar above his eyebrow, a gesture Josephine now recognized as unconscious. Got this at Shiloh. Rifle butt to the face. Would have been worse if my sergeant hadn't pulled me back. You were lucky, Josephine said. So many hadn't been, including her own brother, lost at Gettysburg and buried in a mass grave she would never see. Lucky, Xavier repeated, as if testing the word. Maybe so. But luck has a way of running out eventually. The bleakness in his tone stirred something protective in Josephine. Not always, she found herself saying. Sometimes it changes shape, appears where you least expect it. Xavier's gaze softened as it held hers. Like a wounded stranger appearing on your doorstep at dawn, Josephine felt heat rise to her face that had nothing to do with the fire. Perhaps, she admitted, though the jury's still out on whether that was good luck or bad. His laugh was warm and genuine, dispelling the melancholy that had briefly descended. Fair enough. Time will tell, I suppose. Later, as Josephine lay in her bed listening to Xavier's quiet breathing from the front room, she pondered the strange turns her life had taken. A week ago, she had been alone, resigned to solitude, moving through days marked only by work and occasional memories. Now her small home felt different, warmer somehow, and not just from the presence of another body. Xavier had brought something with him besides danger and complications. He'd brought a reminder of connection, of the simple pleasure of shared conversation and mutual understanding. It was dangerous to become accustomed to his presence, she knew. He would leave once the threat passed, continue his wandering ways, and she would return to her solitude. But for tonight, at least, she allowed herself to savor the comfort of having someone nearby. Someone who saw her not just as a widow struggling against the odds, but as Josephine, a woman with thoughts and feelings and value beyond her ability to endure. Sleep came easier that night than it had in months, dreamless and deep, as if her body recognized it was safe, for once, to truly rest. Dawn broke with a clarity that painted the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Josephine rose early, as was her habit, to find Xavier already awake and building up the fire. He looked up as she entered, offering a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Morning," he greeted her. "Thought I heard coyotes close by during the night. Might want to check the chicken coop first thing." Josephine nodded, touched by his attention to the details of her daily concerns. "They've been bold lately. Thomas used to say they can smell weakness, like all predators." "Smart man," Xavier observed, pouring coffee into a cup and offering it to her. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, a brief contact that nonetheless sent a ripple of awareness through Josephine. "I was thinking I'd repair that loose section of fence today, if you've got tools I can borrow." "There's a toolbox in the lean-to," Josephine replied, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "But you don't need to do that. Your side is still healing." Xavier shrugged, the movement easy and fluid in a way that suggested his wound was troubling him less. "I heal quick, always have. Besides, idle hands make me restless." There was something comforting about his quiet industry, Josephine reflected as she went about her morning chores. Throughout the day, the rhythmic sound of Xavier's hammering provided a counterpoint to her own work feeding the animals, gathering eggs, weeding the last of the garden vegetables before frost claimed them. By mid-afternoon, Xavier had not only repaired the fence, but also fixed a leak in the barn roof and oiled the hinges on the cabin door that had been squeaking for months. Josephine watched him work, noting the care he took, the thoroughness that spoke of respect for craftsmanship even in simple tasks. "You don't have to earn your keep, you know," she told him as they paused for a simple lunch of bread and cheese in the shade of the cabin's porch. "You're here to heal, not to work yourself into a relapse." Xavier's smile was easy, genuine in a way that made her heart beat a little faster. "Work keeps the mind occupied," he replied, breaking off a piece of bread, "especially when there's trouble on the horizon. Better than sitting and fretting." "Is that what you think I've been doing, fretting?" Josephine asked, an edge creeping into her voice. Xavier's eyes met hers directly. "No, Josephine, I think you've been surviving. There's a difference." He hesitated, then continued more softly. "But surviving isn't the same as living. I learned that the hard way." The simple truth of his words struck deep, touching a part of Josephine that had been numb for so long she'd almost forgotten it existed. Since Thomas's death, she had indeed been merely surviving, putting one foot in front of the other, completing necessary tasks, but taking no joy in the world around her, finding no purpose beyond endurance. "And what would you suggest instead?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the weight of the conversation. Xavier considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. "I'm not sure I'm qualified to advise anyone on proper living," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Spent too many years running from things instead of toward them." His gaze swept across the homestead, taking in the fields beyond, the distant line of trees marking a creek. "But I do know that all this what you've built and maintained it matters. It's worth more than just survival." Before Josephine could respond, a cloud of dust on the horizon caught her attention. Riders approaching, at least 3 by the size of the dust plume, moving with purpose toward her homestead. Xavier followed her gaze, his expression immediately shifting to alertness. "Get inside," he said quietly, all trace of casualness gone from his voice. "And bring the shotgun." Josephine didn't argue, recognizing the steel beneath his calm directive. She moved quickly to the cabin, retrieving the shotgun from its place by the door before returning to stand on the porch. Xavier had positioned himself at the corner of the cabin, one hand resting on the pistol Josephine had returned to him that morning. "Could be neighbors," Josephine suggested, though they both knew it was unlikely. The nearest homestead was 5 miles away, and social calls were rare in a place where distance and work made casual visiting a luxury few could afford. "Could be," Xavier agreed, his tone making it clear he thought otherwise. Stay back until we know for certain. The riders drew closer, resolving into 3 men on lathered horses, riding hard toward the cabin. As they approached, Josephine could make out details: rough clothes, unshaven faces, the glint of sunlight on weapons. That's close enough. Xavier called out when the men were within 50 yards, his voice carrying clearly across the open ground. State your business, the lead rider, a burly man with a scarred face partially hidden beneath a bushy beard, reined his horse to a stop. His companions flanked him, hands hovering near their holstered weapons. Looking for a man, the leader shouted back. Tall fella, dark hair, might be wounded. Seen anyone matching that description? Josephine felt Xavier tense beside her, his body coiled like a spring ready to release. Can't say that I have, he replied evenly. What's your interest in this man? The leader spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. He's wanted, killed a friend of ours up north. We're just looking to have a conversation with him. I'm afraid I can't help you, Xavier said, his hand now resting openly on his holstered pistol. This lady and I are alone here, and we'd prefer to stay that way. The leader's eyes narrowed as he studied Xavier more carefully, recognition dawning on his weathered face. Well now, ain't this interesting? Boys, I believe we've found our man. He shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. Colt, isn't it? The one who's been dogging Silas's trail. Harlow sent you, Xavier asked, though it wasn't really a question. 3 men seems a small, welcoming party for someone he considers a threat. The leader's laugh was harsh. Who says we're all there is? Just the advance party, making sure you're actually here before Silas wastes his time. His gaze shifted to Josephine, a leering assessment that made her skin crawl. Found yourself a pretty widow to nurse you, I see. Silas will be interested to hear that. Xavier stepped forward, placing himself more squarely between Josephine and the riders. Your message is delivered. Now ride out while you still can. The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and for a moment, Josephine thought the men might actually turn and leave. Then the leader's hand flashed toward his gun, and the quiet afternoon erupted into violence. Xavier's draw was lightning fast, his first shot catching the leader high in the chest before the man's weapon had fully cleared its holster. The second rider managed to fire, his bullet splintering wood near Josephine's head as she ducked for cover. Xavier's second shot found him a moment later, sending him tumbling from his saddle. The third rider, seeing his companions fall, wheeled his horse and galloped away, bent low over the animal's neck as Xavier's third bullet kicked up dirt at his heels. In the sudden silence that followed, Josephine became aware of her own ragged breathing and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Xavier turned to her, his face tight with concern. Are you hit? He demanded, eyes scanning her for injuries. No, Josephine managed, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm fine. Relief washed over his features, but only briefly. This changes things, he said grimly, moving to check the fallen men. The one who escaped will report back to Harlow. They'll come in force next time. Josephine followed him, shotgun still clutched in white-knuckled hands. How many? Harlow usually travels with at least 6 men, sometimes more, Xavier replied, confirming that both attackers were dead. He searched their pockets methodically, finding nothing of note except a crude map with her homestead circled in charcoal. They knew exactly where to find us. Someone in town must have talked, Josephine said, thinking of the curious stares that had followed them in Preston's Crossing. News travels fast in small places. Xavier nodded grimly. We need to prepare. Harlow won't wait long, especially now that he knows I'm here. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of grim activity. They buried the dead men at the edge of the property, a task Josephine approached with the same stoic practicality she'd applied to all the hardships of her life. Xavier said a brief prayer over the graves, surprising Josephine. Didn't take you for a religious man, she remarked as they walked back to the cabin. Xavier's smile was wry. I'm not particularly, but my mother would haunt me if I buried men without saying something over them, no matter what they deserved. They fortified the cabin as best they could, boarding up windows, positioning furniture for cover, calculating lines of sight and potential approaches. Xavier showed Josephine how to reload the shotgun more quickly. his hands guiding hers with gentle efficiency. "If it comes to it," he told her seriously, "aim for the center of the body, don't try for fancy shots." Josephine met his gaze steadily. "I've hunted since I was a girl, Xavier. I know where to aim." He nodded, respect evident in his expression. "Of course you do, I just—" He hesitated, then continued more softly. "I hate that you're caught up in this. This isn't your fight." "They made it my fight when they marked my home on their map," Josephine replied, determination hardening her voice. "This land is all I have left. I won't run from it." As darkness fell, they ate a simple meal by lamplight, the mood subdued but not hopeless. Xavier had insisted they preserve normalcy where possible, no sense in letting fear rob us of what comfort we can find, he'd said as he helped her prepare supper. Now, with their plates cleared and the night pressing close around the cabin's walls, Josephine found herself studying Xavier's profile in the golden lamplight. There was a stillness about him, a readiness that spoke of years spent in situations where alertness meant survival. "Will they come tonight?" she asked, voicing the question that had hovered between them all evening. Xavier considered, his brow furrowed in thought. "Possible, but not likely. The rider who escaped will need time to reach Harlow, and Harlow's too cautious to attack at night without proper planning." His eyes met hers, honest and direct. "Tomorrow, most likely. At dawn, when they think we'll be sleep-addled." Josephine nodded, both relieved and tense with anticipation. One more night of peace, then. One more night before violence descended on the home she'd fought so hard to maintain. "You should try to rest," Xavier suggested, his voice gentle. "I'll take first watch." She wanted to argue, to insist on sharing the burden, but exhaustion weighed her limbs like lead. The day's events, the killing, the burying, the preparations for more bloodshed had taken a toll she was only now beginning to feel. "Wake me in 4 hours," she said instead. "You need rest too." Xavier's smile was tender in a way that made her heart constrict. "I will, promise." Josephine retreated to her bedroom, though she left the door ajar. She lay atop the quilt, fully clothed, the shotgun within reach, listening to Xavier's quiet movements as he checked windows and doors one final time. Sleep seemed impossible given the circumstances, yet it crept upon her nonetheless, drawing her into dreams where Xavier stood bathed in golden light, hand extended toward her across a field of swaying grass. In the dream, she stepped forward to take his hand, feeling a sense of rightness of coming home after a long journey. She woke sometime later to find Xavier gently shaking her shoulder, his face pale in the dim light of the single candle he carried. "What is it?" she asked, instantly alert. "Are they here?" "No," he assured her. "It's just time for your watch, all quiet so far." Josephine sat up, noting that more than 4 hours had passed according to the small clock on her bedside table. "You were supposed to wake me earlier," she chided, though there was no real anger in her voice. Xavier's smile was apologetic. "You were sleeping peacefully, seemed ashamed to disturb you." The simple consideration touched her deeply. How long had it been since anyone had put her needs, her comfort, before their own? "Well, I'm awake now," she said, rising and reaching for the shotgun. "Your turn to rest." Xavier hesitated. "I'm not sure I can sleep," he admitted. "Too much on my mind." Josephine understood completely. "Then keep me company," she suggested. "The hours pass slower when you're alone with your thoughts." They settled in the front room, positioned to watch the approaches to the cabin while speaking in low voices. Xavier told her more about his years of wandering, about the people he'd met and places he'd seen. In turn, Josephine shared memories of her life before grief had etched itself into every facet of her existence, her skills as a teacher in a small school back east, her love of literature, the poetry she'd once written in quiet moments. "You never told me you were a poet," Xavier said, genuine interest warming his voice. Josephine felt herself blush. "Hardly a poet, just scribbles in a journal." "I'd like to read them sometime," Xavier said softly, "if you were willing to share." "There." "Not very good," Josephine demurred, though secretly pleased by his interest. "I doubt that," Xavier replied. "You speak with such clarity, I imagine your writing carries the same quality." The conversation drifted to hopes neither had voiced in 2 long dreams set aside in the face of hardship and loss. Xavier spoke of land of his own someday, a place to put down roots after years of drifting. Josephine confessed her longing for children, a desire that had once burned bright but dimmed after Thomas's death. "It's not too late," Xavier said gently, "for any of it." Josephine's eyes met his across the shadowed room. "Sometimes it feels like it is," she admitted. "Like life has already decided what portions to allot me and I've received my share." Xavier shook his head, conviction in his gaze. "I don't believe that. Life isn't a ledger with fixed columns. It's wilder than that, more generous sometimes just when you've given up hope." His words stirred something long dormant in Josephine's heart, a flickering of possibility, a whisper of future rather than just endurance. Before she could respond, however, a faint sound from outside caught their attention, the soft nickering of a horse, quickly silenced. Xavier's expression shifted instantly to alertness. "They're here," he whispered, all trace of reflection gone. Earlier than I expected, Josephine felt her heart rate accelerate, but her hands remained steady as she checked the shotgun's load. "How many?" "Can't tell yet," Xavier replied, peering cautiously through a small gap in the boarded window. "Harlow's smart enough to keep his men spread out." He glanced at her, concern evident in his eyes. "Last chance to reconsider, Josephine. You could slip out the back, make for the creek bed. Might be safer." "This is my home," she answered simply. "I'm staying." Xavier nodded, respect and something deeper shining in his eyes. "Then we stand together." Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky when the first shot came, a warning fired into the air, followed by a shouted demand. "Colt, we know you're in there." The voice was gravelly, confident. "Send the woman out and maybe we'll let you live long enough to regret crossing Sela's Harlow." Xavier and Josephine exchanged glances. "Harlow himself," Xavier murmured. "I'm honored. What do we do?" Josephine whispered, tension coiling in her muscles. "Wait," Xavier advised. "Let them make the first move. They're expecting us to panic." Another shot rang out, this one splintering wood near the doorframe. "Last chance, Colt. The woman doesn't need to die for your mistakes." Xavier moved to a different window, assessing the positions of their attackers. "I count 5, including Harlow," he said quietly. "2 by the barn, Harlow, and another near that big oak, one circling toward the back." Josephine took a steadying breath. "What's the plan?" "When I fire, they'll scatter for cover," Xavier explained. "That's when you use the shotgun, aim for the 2 by the barn. The spread will make it harder for them to return fire accurately." His eyes held hers, serious and intent. "Ready?" Josephine nodded, surprised by her own calm. "Ready." Xavier's first shot cracked through the early morning stillness, followed immediately by a cry of pain from near the oak tree. The man with Harlow clutched his shoulder, stumbling for cover as Harlow returned fire, bullets thudding into the cabin's sturdy logs. True to Xavier's prediction, the men by the barn broke cover, running for better positions. Josephine took careful aim and fired, the shotgun's roar deafening in the confined space. One man fell immediately, the other staggered, wounded but still moving. "Good shot," Xavier approved, firing again at the wounded outlaw before he could recover. The man crumpled still. For several minutes, the exchange of gunfire was intense, bullets peppering the cabin as Xavier and Josephine defended their position. They worked with surprising coordination, covering each other as they moved between firing positions, conserving ammunition with careful shots. Harlow's voice rose above the gunfire, rage evident in every syllable. "Burn them out. Use the lamp oil from the barn." A new fear gripped Josephine. Fire was the one threat their log cabin couldn't withstand, and Harlow knew it. "Xavier," she began, alarm tightening her throat. "I see it," he confirmed grimly, spotting the remaining outlaw dashing toward the barn, presumably to fetch the lamp oil stored there. "Cover me." Before Josephine could ask what he intended, Xavier was moving toward the back door, his movements quick and decisive. "Keep Harlow pinned down," he instructed. "Don't let him flank me." Josephine wanted to protest, to beg him not to leave the relative safety of the cabin, but she understood the necessity. Instead, she positioned herself at the window, with the clearest view of the oak tree where Harlow had taken cover, firing methodically to keep the outlaw leader from noticing Xavier's departure. Through the window, she caught glimpses of Xavier as he worked his way toward the barn, using the early morning shadows and scant cover to conceal his approach. The outlaw Harlow had emerged from the barn carrying a sloshing container, unaware of the danger approaching from his flank. Xavier's shot took him high in the back, dropping him instantly. The lamp oil container shattered as it hit the ground, its contents soaking into the dry earth. One threat neutralized, but Josephine knew the most dangerous opponent remained Harlow himself, now aware that his plan had failed and his men were dead or wounded. "It's over, Harlow," Xavier called from his position near the barn. "You're alone now. Surrender and you'll get a fair trial." Harlow's laugh was harsh, edged with desperation. "You think I'm afraid of hanging, Colt? Been expecting that end since I was 16. A bullet accompanied his words, splintering wood near Xavier's position. "But I'm not going alone. You're coming with me." Josephine saw Xavier dart between cover, working his way closer to Harlow's position by the oak. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she tracked his movement, fear for his safety momentarily overwhelming her. A flicker of movement to her right snapped her attention back to her own surroundings. The fifth outlaw, the one Xavier had said was circling behind, now appeared at the corner of the cabin, gun raised toward the window where she stood. Josephine reacted without conscious thought, the shotgun swinging toward the new threat even as the man's finger tightened on his trigger. Her shot came first, the blast catching him squarely in the chest and throwing him backward onto the ground. The echo of his unfired weapon hitting the dirt seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Outside, Xavier and Harlow remained locked in their standoff, neither able to gain a clear advantage. Josephine realized with growing dread that Harlow was working his way toward the house toward her, using the exchange of gunfire with Xavier as cover. She needed to warn Xavier, but calling out would reveal her position to Harlow. Making a swift decision, Josephine moved to the front door, easing it open just enough to slip through onto the porch. The morning air was cool against her flushed skin as she crouched behind the porch railing, shotgun ready. From this angle, she could see both Xavier and Harlow, more clearly Xavier behind the rain barrel at the corner of the barn. Harlow using the oak's massive trunk for cover, but edging steadily toward the cabin. Josephine steadied her breathing, calculating distances and angles as she'd done countless times while hunting game for the table. Harlow was moving carefully, his attention focused on Xavier, unaware of her new position. When Harlow broke cover to make a dash toward the next available shelter, a woodpile stacked against the side of the cabin, Josephine took her shot. The blast caught him in the leg, spinning him off balance but not dropping him entirely. His gun swung toward her, fury contorting his features. Xavier's shot came a split second later, striking Harlow in the chest with devastating accuracy. The outlaw leader staggered backward, disbelief etched on his face as his weapon slipped from nerveless fingers. He made a weak attempt to reach for it, then collapsed face first into the dirt of the farmyard. The silence that followed seemed to press against Josephine's ears like a physical force. She remained frozen on the porch, shotgun still raised, unable to quite believe that the threat was truly neutralized. Xavier approached Harlow's body cautiously, kicking the fallen weapon well out of reach before checking for any sign of life. Finding none, he straightened and turned toward Josephine, relief evident in every line of his body. "It's over," he called, holstering his pistol. "They're all down." Only then did Josephine allow herself to lower the shotgun, her arms suddenly trembling with the aftermath of tension. Xavier covered the distance between them quickly, taking the weapon from her unresisting hands and setting it aside before gathering her into his arms. "You're all right," he murmured against her hair, his heartbeat strong and reassuring against her cheek. "You're safe now." Josephine hadn't realized she was crying until she felt the dampness on her face. Not sobs, but silent tears that seemed to come from some deep well of emotion, fear, and relief, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. "We need to check the property," she said after a moment, practicality reasserting itself even as she lingered in the comfort of his embrace. "Make sure there aren't more of them." Xavier nodded, reluctantly releasing her though his hand remained at the small of her back, a steadying presence. "You're right, but I don't think Harlow would have held anyone in reserve, not his style. They spent the next hour securing the homestead, confirming that all 5 attackers were indeed dead, moving the bodies to the edge of the property for later burial, tending to minor injuries they'd both sustained in the gunfight. Through it all, they worked with the unspoken coordination of people who'd somehow learned to anticipate each other's movements, despite their brief acquaintance. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the trampled yard, Josephine found herself standing beside the water trough, washing blood, some hers, some not, from her hands. The cool water was soothing against her skin, but did little to ease the turmoil in her mind. Xavier joined her, his own hands bearing the evidence of their grim morning's work. "You were incredible," he said quietly. "Most people would have broken under that kind of pressure." Josephine looked up at him, taking in the genuine admiration in his gaze. "I did what needed doing," she replied simply. "Same as you." "No," Xavier insisted, his expression earnest. "It was more than that. You fought for your home, for your life." For he hesitated, then continued more softly. "For us." The word hung between them, weighted with meanings neither had voiced but both had begun to feel. Josephine felt her pulse quicken as Xavier's hand, now clean of blood but still bearing the calluses of hard work, reached for hers. "Josephine," he began, then faltered, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I know this isn't the right time. We've just been through hell and you've got no reason to think beyond this moment. But he drew a deep breath, blue eyes steady on hers. "I don't want to leave when this is over. Not if there's any chance you might want me to stay." The directness of his words stunned her. Since Thomas's death, Josephine had carefully constructed walls around her heart, believing them necessary for survival. Yet here was Xavier, offering not just comfort or temporary companionship, but something far more permanent and far more frightening. "You barely know me," she said, though her hand remained in his, unwilling to break the connection. Xavier's smile was gentle. "I know enough. I know you're brave and stubborn and kind, even when kindness costs you. I know you see beauty in this harsh land when others would see only hardship." His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "I know I've never met anyone like you, Josephine Blackett, and I don't want to ride away from here wondering what might have been." Josephine felt tears threaten again, but these were different, not the release of fear, but the overflow of emotions too complex to contain. "I told you once that God forgot me," she whispered, remembering the bitter words she'd spoken during one of their early conversations when he'd asked about her faith. "After Thomas, after everything, I truly believed it." Xavier's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch achingly gentle. "And I told you then that maybe he sent me as a reminder," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. "A reminder that life continues, that joy is still possible, that love," he swallowed hard. "That love can find us even when we've stopped looking for it." "Love," Josephine repeated, the word both frightening and exhilarating. "Is that what this is, Xavier? After so little time?" "Time is just one way to measure things," Xavier said. "Some things run deeper, happen faster. Like knowing, the moment you wake up in a stranger's cabin with a bullet wound in your side, that you've found something you didn't even know you were searching for." Josephine couldn't help but laugh softly at his description, even as tears spilled down her cheeks. "You were barely conscious when you arrived. How could you possibly know anything?" Xavier's smile was tender as he brushed away her tears with his thumb. "I knew when I opened my eyes and saw you standing there with that shotgun, looking fierce and beautiful and absolutely terrifying." His expression grew more serious, and I've known it more surely every day since. Josephine searched his face, looking for any hint of insincerity, any shadow of doubt. She found only openness, vulnerability, and a hope that matched the fragile bloom unfurling in her own heart. "I'm not easy to love," she warned him. "I'm set in my ways, stubborn as a mule," Thomas used to say. "Good thing I've got experience with stubborn animals," Xavier replied, his eyes crinkling with humor, "and I'm not exactly simple myself." "No," Josephine agreed, allowing herself to step closer to him. "You're not. You're complicated and kind and dangerous and gentle all at once. You're a contradiction, Xavier Colt." "Your contradiction," he offered. "If you'll have me, The question hung between them, weightless yet monumental. Josephine thought of all the reasons to refuse the pain of her past losses, the uncertainty of the future, the whirlwind nature of their connection. But stronger than those concerns was the undeniable truth that Xavier had awakened something she'd thought forever extinguished hope, yes, but also desire, passion, the will to truly live rather than merely survive. Yes, she said finally, the single syllable carrying all the certainty she felt. I'll have you, Xavier Colt, contradictions and all. His smile bloomed, transforming his face with joy before he bent to capture her lips with his. The kiss was gentle at first, a question and an answer both, then deepened as Josephine's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Josephine Blackett, he whispered. Have almost since the moment I opened my eyes in your home. And I love you, she replied, the words easier than she'd expected, as natural as breathing. Though I tried very hard not to, Xavier laughed, the sound warm and rich with happiness. I noticed, you're not exactly subtle when you're trying to keep someone at arm's length. Josephine smiled ruefully. Survival tactic didn't work very well with you. Thankfully, Xavier said, brushing a strand of hair from her face with tender fingers. Otherwise, I might have believed you when you told me to leave once I was healed. Josephine sobered slightly, remembering the bodies still awaiting burial at the edge of the property. There will be questions, she said. The marshal will come, there will be inquiries about what happened here. Xavier nodded, understanding her concern. We'll face it together, he promised. Everything that comes, good or bad, we face together from now on. The simple pledge, spoken in the aftermath of violence, yet carrying the weight of future possibility, settled around Josephine's shoulders like a mantle. Not a burden, but a shared strength, a promise that whatever came next, rebuilding the homestead, dealing with the legal aftermath of the shootout, creating a life together, she would no longer stand alone. Together, she agreed, sealing the word with another kiss. In the days that followed, they buried the dead with simple dignity, then rode to Preston's Crossing to report what had happened. The marshal from North Platte arrived to investigate, but with Xavier's reputation as a former scout for the Army and the clear evidence of self-defense, no charges were filed. News of Harlow's death spread quickly, bringing relief to settlers who had lived in fear of his gang for too long. Through it all, Xavier remained by Josephine's side, his steady presence a reminder of all they had fought for and all they might build together. They were married by the circuit preacher the following month, in a simple ceremony attended by neighbors grateful for the role they'd played in ridding the territory of Harlow's threat. Life on the homestead transformed with Xavier's presence, not easier, necessarily, but fuller, richer in ways Josephine had forgotten were possible. The cabin rang with laughter again, with conversation and occasional heated debates that invariably ended in reconciliation and reaffirmed commitment. With Xavier's help, the farm prospered. They expanded the fields, built the new barn Thomas had planned, added sheep to complement the cattle. When Josephine discovered she was carrying their child the following spring, Xavier's joy was boundless, his tenderness toward her a daily reminder of how completely her life had changed. Did you ever imagine this? Xavier asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Josephine's belly round with their growing child beneath the gentle pressure of his hand. When you pulled a half-dead stranger off his horse, did you ever think we'd end up here? Josephine smiled, leaning into the solid warmth of his shoulder. Never, she admitted. I thought my heart was buried with Thomas. I thought joy was something I'd had my portion of. And now, Xavier prompted, pressing a kiss to her temple. Now I know better, Josephine replied, turning to meet his gaze. Now I know that life isn't measured in portions or rations. It's wild and unpredictable and sometimes painfully generous. Generous, Xavier repeated thoughtfully. That's a good word for it, for all of this. His gesture encompassed not just their home and land, but the life they'd built together, the future expanding before them like the vast prairie horizon. As darkness settled around them, stars appearing one by one in the velvet sky, Josephine felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. For the wounded stranger who had arrived at dawn, for the courage to open her heart again, for the reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, beauty and love could take root and flourish. God didn't forget me after all, she murmured, mostly to herself. Xavier's arm tightened around her shoulders. No, he agreed softly. He just had a different plan than the one you'd imagined. As their child stirred beneath her heart, Josephine smiled, content in the knowledge that some journeys, though marked by loss and hardship, led eventually to unexpected joy if only one had the courage to continue walking the path, one step at a time, toward whatever waited beyond the horizon.